Hi everyone. This is the Cinemablography team here. My name is Mason. We're going to be trying out something a little bit different today, doing sort of open discussion between a couple of the writers here. We have Ravi, Zoe, Landon, and myself, and we're going to be talking about I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Charlie Kaufman. Yeah, we have all seen it pretty recently, and there's definitely a lot to discuss with this movie. So I don't know. Let's start talking about it. Um,
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a ton of ways to start this. Like, there's just so much going on in this movie. The thing that struck me maybe the most repeatedly throughout the movie, because I think it goes a lot of places, but the one thing it always kept coming back to is its use of intertextuality. So just like constantly bringing in like quotes from famous poets or like movies, or it's just always bringing in like other texts. And I think it also has something to say about those. Like, there's a couple quotes I picked. Like, there's that one she says, I forget the character's name because she also changed it. Lucy, I suppose.
yeah, it changes.
I think she's credited as just young woman. I don't
Really?
think she is. I don't think she's given a name in the credits or anything.
Well, actually, you know what? It's probably best before I start going into like themes and ideas. Let's think of like let's just talk about what we thought about it. Like, what'd you guys think?
I
Did you guys
have
like it?
I have mixed feelings. So in terms of just a experience, like it was a wild ride for sure. I definitely was like trying to um get at what was going on basically the whole time, right? I thought it was maybe going to turn into a horror movie for a while, but I think that the ending for me being much more of like a symbolic thing, like it turns out this whole movie is very very symbolic and like figurative. I don't know if I set myself up for disappointment by thinking like something particular was going on. But it was good. I think it was just very different than what I expected. Yeah, I don't know. That answers it.
Considering the amount and the specific films that have released this year, it was certainly like a top tier kind of film of this year. But that could be because there isn't much competition for it, especially like art films or like the kind of film this is. There wasn't much else like it.
Yeah, that's true.
And like obviously the name Charlie Kaufman, if you're familiar with his work, it kind of I was kind of expecting something weird. And actually it reminded me a lot of adaptation. Based mostly I think because this is kind of an adaptation of a book, although he does take liberties from the book. An adaptation is also a kind of adaptation of a book, but that has nothing to do with how the movie is at all. But yeah, I kind of went into it kind of expecting something to be weird, and I was like pleasantly surprised by how much I did enjoy it, but I was also sitting there like, what is happening? Like trying to piece together different things, and then something else would happen, and whatever I had built up would just collapse. I know I was just left kind of confused, but in like a good, pleased way.
The dance scene really made everything that I thought was
Yes.
going on fall apart. I
Yes.
was like, oh, I think I finally get it, and it's like I don't.
I
get it.
wanted to discuss that a bit. If not now, then at some point, because I really want to know.
Let's get Zoe's thoughts first.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I liked it. I guess like you guys, I did come in with sort of like an expectation of what it was. I definitely thought it was gonna be like some kind of horror thing going on. But then like halfway through, I like switched my mindset to thinking like I'm not even gonna try to like piece this out. I'm not gonna try to like figure out what's going on. I'm just gonna like take what's given, because there's so much that he brings up, like the whole like aging thing and like dealing with like reality and how media kind of shapes the way we think of reality and things. Like there's so many like topics he brings up, and I think you can get stuff out of it even if you don't really like understand exactly what he's trying to do and like exactly what like the premise is. You can still like get stuff out of those topics, and I thought that was really cool because it's not something that like you're really expected to understand, at least not like on a first viewing, which I did actually watch it twice because I'm just like, what is this? But yeah, it was definitely an interesting thing to see.
No, I couldn't agree more in the sense that like I think this movie definitely, if you're the kind of person who likes to analyze like themes and connections and concepts, then I think you'll just love this movie because there's so much to pick away at.
I mean,
and
it's really all theme. It's like
it's
very
like
little plot.
Concept. Yeah, it is all concept and theme. And yeah, like I would be hesitant to say I understand 10% of this movie, but I still think that the 10% I do like understand, or at least maybe have an inkling of what he's getting at. Like that alone has been really interesting to think about since I watched it, and has been like, yeah, it's one of those things that I want to watch it again. I want to understand more. And it has something to say, and so I enjoyed it for those things. It's funny that Landon said it reminded of adaptation. I was talking a little bit with Mason about this before. So I said that it reminded me of Synecdoche, New York, and I think that Mason, you said it reminded you of
Eternal Sunshine. But
yeah,
that's the only other Kaufman movie I've seen. So
I think that he just, I mean, I haven't seen adaptation, so I can't say for that. But I think Charlie Kaufman is just Charlie Kaufman, and he's just like, there are connections between all his movies that are is hard to describe other than like you're seeing a Charlie Kaufman movie, and I think we all sort of saw that.
Yeah, I think the one thing I wanted to talk about is just the editing of the movie. Like, it's really tight, it's really solid, and it finds ways of surprising you.
Yes.
Just like how it disorients you, like you're in a dream where she's in one environment, and when she turns, everything's radically different, especially when like the ages of the parents are changing and stuff. That really reminded me of Eternal Sunshine, because it like the scenes, there's a lot of like kind of jump scares in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where like things are rapidly changing around him. So I kind of want to see if he had the same editor for this movie or not. I mean, it might just be Charlie Kaufman style, but
no, I liked the editing a lot for that same reason. I didn't want to call them jump cuts because they weren't exactly, but because they had like no passage of time between them. They just, there was such a neat way to throw off our idea of what we thought was happening the whole time. Because every time that you think you understand, it always just like edits to a different part of the house, or like a different set of characters, or something that you just can't get a grasp on. So they always, played with your ideas of what's going on.
Yeah, and I think like along with that, like when the parts in the editing where we would be surprised, she wasn't necessarily surprised, or like she very quickly like kind of glossed over what she was confused about. And I thought that was really interesting, just because like she's noticing things like, that's not my name, why is he calling me that? Or like, this guy's older now than he was like 10 minutes ago. And like she kind of very quickly moves on from that. So like we're surprised, and we're just like surprised that she isn't as much. And I think like often when you have like jump scares and stuff, that'll be like the characters feeling what you are, but she totally wasn't, and that was a really interesting experience.
So I just looked up the editor. It's Robert Frazen, and he did not edit Eternal Sunshine, but he did edit Synecdoche, New York.
That makes sense to me. Can we actually talk about a little bit the like, it was just so interesting to me to see constantly, like Zoe just brought up, there would always just be these contradictions, or these like things that did not make sense, and we as an audience were like thinking about it and confused, but Lucy / whoever would always just maybe be confused for a second, like, oh, that's odd, that's not right, but would quickly accept it and just like go with it. What do we think was like going on? Like, do we take this to be literal? Do we take this, how are we supposed to view this character, or what is the purpose of her confusion like this?
So I I think I talked with my roommate who I watched this with for a while, and we did like research like what the book was about and stuff. But I think it's basically like a a dreams uh, a dream's perspective on a dream or a fantasy. Like
Mm.
Lucy is not real. She exists within the mind of the janitor. But he is like imagining this life with her that he could have had. So he meets her at like in reality, he
I
meets her at a
see.
party and she's like, "Get away from me, you creep. I would never want to see
Yeah.
you in like 40 years or whatever."
Yeah.
And like he's like, "Bummer." But then he creates this whole fantasy about what could have been.
Hmm.
And he uses that movie that he watches as like the foundation of that.
Oh.
Um, and then I think he's having like deteriorating mental health in terms of like suffering from Alzheimer's or something.
That
Um,
makes a lot of sense,
but
actually.
that's why like the picture of her is
Hmm.
the picture of him as a child is actually her or vice
Yeah.
versa. And like she kind of lets these things slip of how they met, like the story of how they met doesn't match up.
Yeah.
And at one point when they're in the car together, she's replaced by the actress.
Hmm.
um so yeah, it's like the dream's own experience of the
Yeah.
dream.
Aware of itself.
Although I don't know what's with him getting naked and walking with a pig at the end. That was
Yeah.
really bizarre.
I don't think that's actually. I think he's dead in the car.
No, I mean maybe he's dead.
Yeah.
I didn't know what that, if that was part of his
I don't know.
fantasy
Look at
too.
that stuff.
I think
I
like
actually like interpretation, Mason. Sorry,
Where
it
that-
adds up a lot of the plot points. Like it explains, yeah, a lot of the contradictions because those are just made up details, I guess, about her backstory, like why she's like a painter and a biologist and all these things. It explains, yeah, like the connection between why he constantly has these anachronistic like ideas of what is going on in the world. Yeah, so I actually really like that interpretation.
So then is Jake the janitor's kind of avatar in this dream world where that's kind of
It's like the
that's kind of his
idealized
point of
version.
view is from Jake.
Yeah.
Ooh,
It's like the idealized version of
yeah,
himself.
that
too.
actually the word that reminds me of the quote that he says at the very beginning of like he compares the Lucy to like this girl who kills herself or something, and he says like you're young, beautiful, idealized, right? He says like that's you're ideal, and that would make sense if that connects. In fact, there's a lot of quotes. I think so. I had this whole like list of quotes I loved because I thought the quotes were like some of my favorite parts of this movie because they're just so deep and nebulous, and I feel like they connect to so many different things. And a lot of the quotes I wrote down make total sense with that interpretation that Lucy is kind of just a figment of Jake's imagination. Like there's a couple like thought is realer than action. It's an unspoken thought, unoriginal. There's a ton, but yeah, the car ride sequences definitely add into I think the figment of imagination interpretation.
What fascinated me about the car scenes is that they were shot mostly from outside of the window instead of from inside the car. And as the drive went on and the storm got worse, the ice and the snow starts to crowd in on kind of the focal point of the window, which the camera is looking through at their faces. And so it's like it's getting hazier and hazier to like see what's actually going on, both literally in the shot. You start to like the faces start to be covered, but as the film goes on, like it just gets stranger and stranger, and like all sense of like singular purpose is just covered in this crazy editing and like these quotes which are so poetic, and like if you go back, like they'll probably make a lot more sense, but they're poetic to the point where it's like no one speaks like that, so like what are they saying? So that I thought that was a fascinating choice to shoot from outside the car, and to do that kind of ice effect.
Yeah. I think, Mason, I don't know if you were thinking of this as I was, because Mason and I are in the same existentialism class right now. And so there were a lot of themes of like existentialism throughout. And one of them that talked about was like the idea of the subjective experience and how you can't ever escape your own perception of the world. You can't ever like see the world as everyone else sees it. Yeah. And I think that like that shooting from outside the car is kind of is related to that, in the sense that like you can only you can't get in someone else's head. Like you're always stuck on the outside. If you're the one in the car, you're stuck in the car. If you're the one outside the car, you're stuck outside the car. There's no way to open the door, really.
Yeah, and you are given, like, we are presented with this very subjective viewpoint of Lucy, where we're really not, that we don't have an omniscient camera in this film. It's so tied to exactly what Lucy understands. And I mean, like the whole time at her Jake's parents' house is so like claustrophobic because of how little we understand. I mean, I do think that's part of what to me is like, this is definitely like some kind of a dream or an imagination, because like they have dinner, but like no one eats anything.
Yeah.
They just like talk. And I mean, just that whole sequence of scenes, they're so good, like so awkward. It was just making me cringe the whole time, but like just because of how tense and awkward it is. Also really weird, but like 80% of the actors in this movie are in Fargo, like the show, in one season or another. Like Jake, the actor that plays Jake, is in season 2, and like oh my gosh, what's the name of the father? The guy that plays like Remus Lupin.
Oh, is that who that is? I was wondering.
The actor's name.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, look it up for me. But
it's David Thewlis, if that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, he's in season 3. The Lucy is in season 4, which is coming out right now. It was just really weird.
Yeah.
Really weird connection. Anyway, let's talk about the dance.
Please. Yeah.
What is it? What does it mean?
I mean, to me, it seemed like a very idealized version of like themselves. Like it's Jake and I guess Lucy, as I was thinking of her at the time, just because I needed a name for her. But they're kind of like, they're idealized. Like as she's having questions about like the relationship, and she's mentioned things like about how he seems controlling, how like she didn't really want to go out with him, she just was afraid to say no, sort of thing. But then this is like the movie version of it, or like the musical version of it, where like they're kind of like a little more fancy dressed and like a little more like Hollywood style. And it's definitely like you got like the duel at the end where they like fight and somebody dies and stuff. So it's very like Hollywoodized, and like that story is like not reality. And so she's kind of like looking at that, and I think both of them are like seeing that like this is like what they kind of were imagining it as, but it's not actually real.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go ahead, Robbie.
Go ahead. No, I had a similar, not full interpretation, but I connected not just the play scene at the end, or like the dance, but I think every form of like the arts in this movie, like music especially, but musical theater, as it's like talked about, movies, poetry, I think they're all representative of the ideal through this movie, because they often like the Jake just like knows all these musical theater productions. He just like, I think he looks up to them, and there's that scene where he's like in the audience like cleaning as a janitor, if he is the janitor, which I think he is, looking up, and I think he just like holds the arts like this on some like ideal pedestal. And the reality of the situation is that, and if we're going with like Mason's idea, where in reality Lucy just rejected him at the bar and like said he was a creeper, then that's like the awkward reality, right? And from Lucy's perspective, like everything she experiences is the awkward reality. and the idea that the arts are like some more ideal version of reality, which also goes along with like the other existential themes. So I think it is like an idealized version of their relationship.
Yeah,
That's
I think that
interesting.
the dance represents like like you were saying, the ideal, and then what kills the idealized version of Jake is the real version of Jake, which
Mm.
I thought was really interesting. Like
Yeah.
he could be with this girl and it could be wonderful and they would be dancing or whatever, and he just comes and like kills him because the real version of Jake that just becomes this lonely old man is all that's really there. Um, so it's like a really bummer ending.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
also
What's
like
interesting is we see the janitor watching kind of a cheesy rom-com that's directed by Robert Zemeckis.
yeah.
And then
That's so funny to
his
me.
ideal self is into all this high art. Like he mentions that he likes Woman Under the Influence by John Cassavetes. And then Lucy kind of recites a review of it from someone that just tears the movie apart. So that was kind of an interesting, like, he's into, in real life, these cheesy kind of maybe less quality arts, but his ideal self knows all this poetry and knows all these classic, like indie art films, John Cassavetes type thing. But then in his kind of ideal dream world, that gets torn apart. So, like, I'm curious, like,
Yeah.
what is that implying?
Well, I don't think that the imagined Lucy always cooperates. So she like I think in that example, like she kind of pushes back on him. And then she mentions one time, like when she met this guy at a bar and she didn't want anything to do with him. And then we realize that she's referring to Jake, and he looks really depressed all of a sudden. And so every once in a while, some reality slips through. I think that's part of it. I do wonder, like, why she is imagining, like, why he imagines her as wanting to end things, and there's always this ambiguity about whether she's going to end her own life or end the relationship.
I have an idea about that, and you can deny this, but I think so. There's like a theme throughout this. I think that ideas and thoughts have their own life to them, and once you have them, you don't just own this thought. You don't own an idea. Like it has its own life to it. And so I think there's also a theme of consent versus coercion, right? So Jake really wants this ideal fantasy where he can like imagine that Lucy just said yes and kept saying yes, like, you know, was always with him. But the idea he has of her isn't just going to play along, because like that's not her anymore. If she was just someone who always say yes. And so this idea he gives life to of Lucy, this imagined thing, will always naturally, if it's anything like the real Lucy who said no to him, will tend towards thinking of ending things. And every time that she is about to say like, hey, I'm thinking of ending things, it's one of those jump cuts where Jake is just taking control again of the fantasy. And he's saying like, no. This is my fantasy. Like this is what I say goes. And so it always like jump cut to like, hey, we're at the, you know, the Tulsi town or whatever. So he wants to control his own thoughts and his own ideas, but he doesn't really accept the fact that once he has them, he can't just keep total control of them, I guess.
Like every time someone makes a point, so many things in the movie like jump out immediately. Like how on their drive home, he keeps saying like, oh, to the farmhouse, and she's like, no, to my house in the city.
Yeah.
And then when they're in the high school parking lot and he starts singing Baby It's Cold Outside, and she's like, oh, you're gonna sing a rape song at me? And he's like, it's not a rape song. She wants to stay, but she's afraid of how other people think. And then she's like, no, she doesn't want to stay.
Yeah.
So that, like every time someone is like says something, that just connects back to so many things.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if this like goes with it. But at the end, it looked an awful lot like the janitor, which is like I was thinking of as like the real Jake. He's like taken all his clothes off and he's sitting in his truck in the freezing cold. So it seems like he's trying to commit suicide. And so like the whole time when she's saying, like she's a figment of his imagination, she's something he came up with, and she's saying, I'm thinking of ending things. And so you think that that's because she's breaking up with him or she doesn't want to be with him anymore, but it's actually like him processing, thinking like I'm thinking of ending things, like he's thinking of ending things completely. And so like that ties back in with like his suicide at the end.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you could take it anyway, but that was
No, that makes sense. Also, could be why like at the very beginning she talks like one of her first lines is like, I don't know how long I've had this thought. Like I feel like it's always been in there within me, or something like that. Which also ties into it.
Yeah. So I think we should wrap it up. Maybe give our closing thoughts here.
Sure.
I'm appreciating it more. I'm gonna need like another couple
Yeah.
weeks to
Go for a group
digest.
rewatch point.
Yeah, group rewatch. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like this movie, I would love to rewatch it as well. Like I think, just like the notes, I think like not a lot of notes, but a couple, and I got to like one out of the like 9 themes I had highlighted as things I wanted to talk about. There's just so much to talk about this movie, and like there's like no way we could ever fit it all. But I love that like we you know, we're in a time where Netflix can just pump out a movie that, you know, if you're in the high arts or just like the film world, you've heard of it, but most people probably haven't watched it, and it's just like filled with themes and concepts and just ideas by Charlie Kaufman, and I love that. So I recommend it to people who like just conceptual films. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I really liked it. I kind of struggled with the idea that she wasn't a real person, because I was like, the whole time, I'm like, this is a strong female character who I like, who's like having thoughts that are like very autonomous and very kind of like power filled. And so like she's like taking control of a relationship that she felt she didn't have control of before. And so I was like a little bit sad to see that like she wasn't actually a person, like she was literally being like created by somebody else. And so like I enjoyed it, but also it like took a bit for me to like get that and like reconcile that with like what I initially thought of the film the first time I watched it. So yeah, it was good, but I also think how he could get those themes in while still like doing the whole thing with reality, I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I guess for my final thoughts, the scene where she's talking to Jake's father about kind of painting sad landscapes, and he says, well, how can it be sad if there's not a person in there that looks sad? And she says, well, imagine you're standing looking at a landscape and you're not in it, you're still going to feel something. And then he's like, well, I could look down and I would be there. But that kind of captured my kind of thoughts on the film, was like, even if you don't like get it, or it doesn't seem like there's a specific storyline to follow, it's still going to make you feel something. And I think that's something that oftentimes we don't consider when watching a film, especially one that's as high concept as this, where it can feel confusing. But like, even if it's just creating an emotion, it's still doing something.
Yeah, I like that. All right, well, I think that's pretty much it. You know, thank you for sticking around and watching this. Let us know what you think about this kind of new form we're exploring at Cinemablography. Yeah, go watch the movie and let us know what you think. All right, until next time, bye.